Hello, and welcome back to Overnight Experts, the show where we talk about something that we became an expert on overnight. My name is David, and today I'm joined by
Aiden
and JJ.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the 7 Years' War. Is this a war you guys are familiar with?
I stick to the philosophy of history started in 1776. Just kidding.
No, that was good. Yeah, I mean, I remember it came up briefly in like a list of wars when I was in history class, but not much more than that.
Okay, so I'm going to make a bold statement here. The 7 Years' War is the most important war you've never heard of.
That is a bold statement. We're gonna hold you to that one.
So some historians have even called it World War Zero, which is the coolest name for anything.
Oh man, they stole that from the next Call of Duty game. The fact that it hasn't been used yet is incredible.
I mean, maybe it'll be a good setting for a future Call of Duty.
Yeah, well, I'm going to describe the events of the war, and maybe, I don't know, you can imagine your own video game, and we'll see what happens from there.
Wait, should we trademark this and then sell it to Activision and then?
Ooh, let's see if the domain is up for grabs.
I don't think we can hold up against Activision's lawyers on whether or not we can copyright that.
WorldWar0.com. You could buy it for $70.
Shoot! Yeah, let's squat that.
Yeah. We'll domain park that. Hell yeah.
So yeah, World War Zero is what they called it. Yeah, World War Zero. So it was fought on 5 continents. So Africa, Europe, Asia, both of the Americas. It's really the World War before the actual World Wars. And it kind of sets the stage for like a big series of dominoes that ultimately decides all of world history after that. So if you have a time machine and you're looking for somewhere to go back in time where they won't expect you to go, don't go back in time and assassinate Hitler. Go back to the 7 Years' War. They'll never catch you. So 7 Years' War happens between 1756 and 1763. So pre-America, there is no America. There's no Canada.
There was always America. America's a state of mind, man.
We were in the colonies back then.
Building in the hearts of the people. I don't know. Keep going.
Right. So it's a very just different world. Europe is still building its colonies in the world. And that's like, it's a very just different political landscape to what we're used to today.
I mean, most of the world was still monarchs at that point.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure where the Netherlands were. They're like one of the only republics that lasted for a bit, and then they became monarchy. ...
Let's go back.
But yeah, for the most part, it's all kings and queens. It's all just all the same like medieval tension that there used to be in Europe. Only everyone has guns now, which is a problem. So I'm going to describe the various locations that the war happens, and we're going to also follow the lives of 2 people in the British Army, because spoilers, the British, you could argue that they won the 7 Years' War.
I mean, they argue that.
Well, if you look at the results, England comes off the best in the 7 Years' War. So we're gonna follow the lives of 2 people. Let's call one of them George and one of them James. You know, good English names.
It's so good they'll name them after kings.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, once you've got a king, you can pretty much guarantee there's going to be a million people with that name. So we'll put George in the army. We'll put James in the navy. So things kind of start to get bad in 1754. So in 1754, you've got the 4 major powers of Europe. Well, the 4 major colonial powers of Europe. You've got England, France, Spain, Portugal, and they're starting to build their global empires. So Portugal's taken over the eastern half of South America. They've got colonies in Africa as well as India. You've got the Spanish Empire, which covers Mexico, west coast of South America, You've got England, who's controlling what is now the United States. You've got France, who's controlling Canada, and everyone's kind of got little pocket setups all over the place.
So it really is global.
Yeah, well, it really is global. You couldn't have a world war prior to this because you didn't have the far reach, like you didn't have the European empires that we had in the 18th century. So this is really the first opportunity for a world war. So things start off with our boy our boy George. So the soldiers in England are messing around with the soldiers in New England are messing around with the soldiers in New France. And they're just competing to steal the most land from North America as they can. So tensions are really rising in Ohio along the Ohio River.
So it would be Ohio.
Ohio River runs red for the first time.
Where basically they're just having a fort building competition. So they're basically playing Fortnite against each other.
But did we really have a Fortnite in Ohio in the 1700s?
That is what I'm claiming for the history.
I was thinking clickbait the title of this so hard. I love it.
So yeah, that's what they did. Is they just had these fort building competitions. England builds a fort. Well, France builds a fort. Well, you've got a fort. Well, I've got 2 forts, and they're trying to stake their claim, because that's really how you owned territory back then. Was you build a fort, you put soldiers in it. Great, I own the land here.
So by the end of it, did they just start throwing up walls like at each other when there's only 2 soldiers left, just like trying to block each other's shots?
Well, probably, yeah. Like they're just having this huge competition of like they're building up their military strength like against each other, preparing for conflict. And wouldn't you know it, our friend George goes and wrecks everything. The English attack the French, and the French are like, "Yo, what are you doing? Your colony is attacking my colony." Of course, King George in England is like, that's too bad, guys. It's a real shame. I can't control what the colonies are doing, you know?
A little bit,
Yeah, if you didn't have such sucky colonies, this wouldn't be a problem. So France
definitely won't come back to bite them at all.
Well, yeah, well, exactly. France and England, as you know, legendary rivals. They've just been fighting on and off for 1,000 years. And this is just another stack on top of that. So prior to the 7 Years' War, England and France already don't like each other, even more than they already didn't like each other.
So the actual heads of states are now more pissed off because their colonies are fighting over the like the East Indies or whatever, which is actually America.
No, isn't it the West Indies?
West Indies? What do they call it when it was Columbus coming over? He was like, "Oh, we found the Indies." Like, no, you didn't.
I think it's the West Indies, because there are. I don't know.
I was going off a joke of colonialism, and it fell flat. Moving on.
That's okay. Yeah. So yeah, they're basically competing for control of North America. Yeah, and already they don't like each other, and they're just making things worse. Meanwhile, you've also got Spain and Portugal, and that's really who England and France are competing against. So, as we know, the sociopath Christopher Columbus discovered North America in 1492 and just murdered everyone he saw who had a different skin color than him.
Like, hippity hoppity, your land is my property.
It's cool though. Now we get a day off from school for it.
Yeah, remembrance. Oh boy.
But yeah, really, Portugal and Spain were the first to start colonizing the New World. So they have this huge, major head start on England and France. And just, in the lead up to the 7 Years' War, are England and France actually, turning a profit on their empires. Stuff is finally happening for them, whereas previously they were just playing second fiddle to Spain and Portugal. Yeah, but things are remaining stable in Europe. Everything is going well until a very random event happens called the Diplomatic Revolution.
That's an interesting combination of terms.
Yeah. So the Diplomatic Revolution sounds a lot more interesting than it was. So previously, England and France, always enemies, but they're buddies So previously, Austria and England, best friends. Same thing with France and Prussia. Now, Prussia, not to be confused with Russia, is more, well, yeah, it kind of becomes Germany, sort of. It's like an area in Germany. Just whenever I say Prussia, think Germany.
Makes sense. Like geographically today, Prussia would be mostly where Germany is.
More or less, yeah. So
sure there are some historians who are just, clenching right now, but
it's fine. I'm an overnight expert. I'm not a real expert. So Austria and England used to be friends. Prussia and France used to be friends. And then they swapped. Now England and Prussia are friends, and France and Austria are friends.
Okay, so they traded friends like they traded spouses at a 70s key party. Got it.
Yeah, it's something like that.
That's basically how European politics have worked up to this point.
Yeah, you're not wrong there.
Right. Well, it's all kind of an arms race. Like in reading this, it feels very much like the lead up to World War I of everyone's in this arms race of I got to stay in competition with these other guys. I got to make sure that, this random power isn't more powerful than this other random power. And so, I mean, what happened was that these alliances kind of decayed in an event called the Austrian War of Succession. Basically, I don't know, some random politics. Someone took over Austria and someone else didn't think that they should take over Austria. There was a little skirmish and England and France were kind of pulled into this. And they're like, this alliance sucks. We hate this. We don't want to be a part of this anymore. This is a waste of our time. We don't really care what happens.
Seems like whenever there's a state that tries to claim independence from another state, it'll always have like a worldwide effect. Like even today, you can look at I'm just going to bring up the current stuff like Hong Kong or Taiwan. Like most people will try to recognize them as their own state, but then China's like, no, and that's been a problem. So I see Austria causing tensions by even depending on how it happened, was insurrection or people wanting to. Them trying to be their own state would absolutely cause tensions around them.
Well, exactly. But the thing is that England and France, they just don't care. Like they're pulled into this war, and it's once the war is over, they're like, man, what a waste of resources. So the alliances kind of decay, and then I guess they kind of realized. Well, so England is realizing, hey, I bet if we can make Prussia really good, they'll start picking on France, and we already hate France, so this is just going to go well for us.
The enemy of your enemy.
Exactly. That's kind of how they decide to do it is, let's just start messing with other people. Let's try to make these little buddy groups.
They're all mean girls.
Exactly. So the lines are starting to be drawn in the sand. So it becomes England. Oh, I'll send you a map here.
Oh, maps are good.
It's in French though. Apologies.
It's okay. I'll try to interpret it. As long as the measurements are in like baguettes, I think it'll be good.
Okay, so here's the map. So you've got France, Austria, Russia, best friends forever. You've got England, Hanover, and Prussia, best friends forever.
Okay.
So this is basically you got Northern Europe versus Southern Europe, quote unquote.
Sure.
This is these are now the alliance groups, and I guess they never learned, if we make these big alliances and say, if you attack one person, you attack all of us, what's the worst that could happen? No one learned anything from the 7 Years' War because it's like if you did a prequel and it's the exact same story as World War I.
Did we learn anything from war? Let's be real here.
Well, apparently not. No. So everything starts off when Prussia attacks Austria. And everything explodes. Suddenly, everyone is at war. And kind of like World War I, everyone's kind of using this as an opportunity of, well, we wanted to go to war anyway. We just didn't have a reason prior to now.
It's just, hey, somebody started the war. Perfect timing.
Yeah, well, I guess. Twist my arm, why don't you?
Yeah.
It's like with enough tension amongst states, like if somebody decides to start enough trouble that pushes other people in the directions, they would then want to join in and get their own agendas into the 7 Years' War.
Well, that's the thing. If you're going to be at war, you got to be able to
get something out of it.
Yeah. So we've got two two factions because also in the war, in addition to the other people, we get Sweden, Spain, and Portugal. So Sweden and Spain
Sweet.
are Sweden Sweden sees an opportunity and it takes it. So
Nice.
it wants to steal some lands from Prussia, and it's like, well, Prussia, you're a little busy fighting Austria. We'll just take your land, and hopefully you don't miss it. Oopsie daisy.
Who was king of Sweden at that time? Was it the guy they made the Sabaton song about? Because that's a good song.
I don't know. didn't look into who is the king of Sweden. So yeah, they joined
King Ingmar from IKEA.
Yeah, exactly. Their plan is to take Prussia apart and disassemble its pieces, store it in a factory to be reassembled somewhere else. So yeah, Sweden joins France's side, and so does Spain, and they use that opportunity to go and attack Portugal. Really, everyone's just looking for an excuse to fight each other. Like no one needed to do the 7 Years' War, but everyone kind of got tired of each other.
It was just convenient to dogpile onto it.
Right. Of like, well, if these people are fighting and they're otherwise busy, no one's going to stop me from doing this.
It's like when you got a bunch of roommates and your landlord comes in and raises the rent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when you throw tea in the harbor. That comes later.
Yeah, it comes later. Don't spoil the end of the war. But yeah, everyone wants a piece of Prussia. And it's fair because it is Prussia's fault. Prussia started 7 Years' War. And everyone's like, oh, I'm going to use this opportunity to get my piece of Prussia. If we all gang up on Prussia, it's going to go well for us. And Prussia's like, England, please help us. And England's like, oh, don't worry. We'll help you. We'll help you everywhere else in the world. So England's big contribution to the war is it uses this opportunity to start stealing everyone else's colonies. Classic technique.
Classic England.
So, technically they are fighting the French and the Portuguese. Sorry, not the Portuguese. They're fighting the French, and they're trying to remove power from the Spanish, but they're actually not all that helpful because they saw an opportunity and they took it.
Yep.
So fighting happens in a couple places. In India, and this is what makes it a world war. Once you have India and Africa involved,
We've gone into South Asia now.
Exactly. So in India, France allies itself with the Mughal Empire, and their goal is to get rid of the East India Company. But the East India Company beats them, and so takes over India.
It's kind of impressive how much power they had.
Oh yeah, it's like I'm not sure what the equivalent would be now. Like if you gave Amazon guns.
Yeah, it's just you roll up to the shores trying to take India, and Amazon Prime ships show up and just like take you down.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the same day delivery. You can't compete with that.
Exactly.
So India gets taken over. In Africa, England captures the French colonies there of Senegal and the Gambia, in case you're wondering, which are in West Africa. So, sorry, France, there go your African colonies.
So they were also claiming it down there, so even greater area to take over.
Right. Well, France is focused on fighting Prussia. Because they're right next door. So they see this as, hey, not only can we get rid of the Prussians, which we don't much care for anyway, but we can maybe expand some mainland French territory. And while they're focusing on mainland France, all their colonies, things don't go so well.
So England is just taking advantage of Prussia getting beat by France because France is busy, that they're just going to take all the other parts of the world that France had.
Exactly. Not realizing.
So scummy.
Yeah, well, it's smart. It worked out for them pretty well. We are speaking English now because of this war.
Oh, well, yeah, this absolutely affects us today. It's just like, man.
But yeah, at the time, it's like a very, pretty underhanded thing of, are you allies with Prussia or are you not? Help them because all of Europe is at war with them. Like on three sides, they're fighting people. And England is focusing the majority of its military force everywhere else in the world.
Gosh.
So Portugal and Spain are duking it out just to continue the fighting in Europe. And they've got my favorite name for this war. So Spain invades Portugal, and this event is called the Fantastic War.
Nice.
Just like the Fantastic Four, if you get the name wrong while you're searching.
I didn't even make that connection.
It's a knockoff Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
This is like when you go to the DVD section and you got like the Steel Man or like the
Transmorphers.
Transmorphers, like those kinds of things, or Atlantic Rim. We've got the Fantastic War.
Fantastic War. So Portugal is recovering from an earthquake. They're like, things aren't going so well in Portugal, and Spain sees this opportunity and they take it. They're going to get rid of Portugal once and for all, and so they attack. And they call it the Fantastic War because Spain does terribly. There are no major battles. They're sending like huge numbers of troops, but they don't like the Spanish troops all die.
No.
It's a complete failure. And Portugal really doesn't lose that much. Like, they just manage to be defensive, and it works out perfectly for them. Same thing happens in Brazil of, like the Spanish colonies are attacking the Portuguese colonies, and they pull back of like, let's be defensive here. And they capture a little bit, but not a whole lot. And in the end, Spain just gives up, and they make an agreement of, all right, we will give you back everything you had pre-war. So everything goes back to the status quo. Just like it does not at all go well for Spain. They make a gamble and they lose spectacularly. And that's why Portugal calls it the Fantastic War, because for them, pretty fantastic.
This is how you know that history is written by the victors.
Yep.
Well, exactly. Or at least Wikipedia is written by the victors.
At some point.
What is like the kinds of warfare and the kinds of battles that happen during this 7-year war? Because I mean, obviously, we do have firearm technology at that point, but it's still fairly primitive. So what, how are they fighting each other?
Well, it's not too different from the technology that you see in the Revolutionary War, which would only be about 20 years after.
Okay.
So you still have, you've got muskets, you've got flintlock rifles, you've got ships with cannons on them. That's the technology of the day. You don't have Gatling guns yet. I can't imagine there are too many people with swords, but maybe you'd have bayonets. Doesn't seem like cavalry was a huge part of it, but you would probably have a couple of people on horseback, likely with guns. My military history isn't that good, but that's a level of technology that we're talking.
Even at this point, and honestly beforehand, like stuff like swords were carried, but they were usually intended to be sidearms. Like, I know we look at heroic fantasy stuff today, and everyone's got like the important sword, but like spears were like the most common thing before guns because they were longer and you could get hurt less, but they were used as backups.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly the types of weapons people had, but it would have been those more primitive guns that you see in. I'm assuming that American Revolution, that would be what comes to mind when you think of primitive rifles.
And I do see some technology, just looking at this briefly, that was not available in the Revolutionary War, and that is, I see a painting, presumably of Great Britain and India, and they have an elephant.
I'm
just saying, this one had elephants. The Revolutionary War didn't. This is better.
How did they get over here? How did Ringling Brothers Circus get their elephants?
They must have been here for the war.
But yeah, sort of that level of technology. Unfortunately, no elephants.
Oh,
so
shucks.
I guess the best recorded part of the war, and I guess the most important, because this is like to jump ahead to the end of the war, nothing really happens in Europe. Everyone just agrees to go back to normal once the war is done. They kind of give up. They see, well, we're kind of evenly matched. We'll just, anything I took, I'll give back. You give me anything you took, and we'll just call it even. Europe just goes back to the way it was. Meanwhile, England is like, well, we just kind of took everything. Whoopsie daisies.
They had the big brain move before everyone else.
Well, exactly. And it worked out spectacularly.
For 20 years until.
Well, we are speaking English, so
Yep.
They have done something right. So the main event is what happens in America. So the 7 Years' War in America has a different name that you might be more familiar with. It's called the French and Indian War.
Okay, yes.
So that's ringing more bells.
In our growing up like history books, they'll talk about like the French and Indian War, and there'll be a footnote saying also called the 7 Years' War, and so it's like, history taught in American schools is very, very, very America centric.
Yeah, well, and with Canada, it's not too different because they do focus a little bit on, well, their goal is to focus on Canadian history, which is sadly not all that interesting.
Honestly, I prefer that at this point.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like even with the importance to, what eventually becomes America, like, when we start talking American history, we kind of focus in on the Revolutionary War, and then, how the British were quote unquote oppressing us, and then move right along to freedom, independence,
freedom,
all that.
Yeah, and for me, it's also been interesting because a lot of the history I learned in school, because I was in French immersion, just happened to be in French. So I've had to learn the English terms for a lot of these wars, conflicts, ethnic groups, which has been interesting.
You ever just like swap into the other language and people are like, "What are you talking about?"
Well, like I've had to look up. So, like for instance, learning about World War II, there's a French word for the city of Warsaw in Poland. Like they've got a different word for it. They call it Varsovie.
Varsovie. I can't do French pronunciations.
That's okay. But like you can see it's close-ish, but like you would think that a city in Poland, you just have one name for it. But it turns out everyone's got their own names for important cities, which has been interesting. Anyway, back on topic. So in this is the main event. So the French and Indian War. You've got England and France. We go back to our buddy George here. You've got these militia groups. They are just constantly harassing the French, and the French are getting pretty fed up about it. In the lead up to the French and Indian War, and I must specify, when they say Indian, they don't mean people from India. They mean First Nations people, which is confusing because there are actual people from India involved in the 7 Years' War. No one ever thought to rename the war, but what can you do? So already the lines were being drawn during the days of fur trade. This I didn't look up, but I am curious to hear the American perspective. In Canadian history class, we hear that the fur trade was massively important for the birth of Canada. Is that at all relevant to American history?
Yeah, Canadian fur trappers is kind of the stereotype for that period of history. Yeah.
No, but for America, like, is fur trading a part of American history?
No, not nearly as much. I mean, there was still definitely trade in fur, but obviously, like, since we have different climes, then it was less important for the entirety of America.
Okay, because that's what we learned, is that it was competition between two different groups of fur traders, the French fur traders and the English fur traders. In any case, England and France, being the two major European powers there, allied themselves with the local First Nations groups. And this worked well for the First Nations groups because even though the Europeans have guns, you could trick the Europeans into fighting each other and they just leave you alone because they're too busy fighting each other. You can kind of just do your own thing. And they can also use this as an opportunity to get back at their enemies. So with the British, they buddied up with the Iroquois and the Cherokee, which are now, pretty recognizable terms. The Iroquois, at the time 5 nations, now 6 nations, confederacy, still exists today. Cherokee, they've got a Grand Caravan Jeep named after them. I'm sure. I'm sure there are worse things that you could be remembered for.
It's a pretty decent car.
Okay, good. So those are the guys who team up with the British, and then the French team up with the Micmac, the Abenaki, the Huron, and the Algonquin. And I don't think things went very well for them because the English win the French and Indian War, and they are much kinder to their allies than they are to their enemies. So it doesn't go well for anyone who was on Team France.
Nope.
So there are these skirmishes. You've got the English fighting the French. the different First Nations groups fighting each other. Meanwhile, going back to our what was so we've got in the Navy, England is meanwhile planning more
Conquest.
more conquest. They're playing some sneaky tricks. So we've got our friend James in the Navy. He's part of a mapping expedition, and he's mapping out Newfoundland. He's mapping out Quebec. And what they're doing is they're planning on a sneak attack. What they're going to do is they're going to surprise the fortress of Quebec City with an attack and just get rid of the French in the New World. That is their ultimate goal. So it's 1759. We are, how many years into the war is that? 3 years into the war. When, surprise, it's the British Navy and the British Army, and they show up in a place called the Plains of Abraham. Now, I'm imagining that has no significance to you guys.
Nope. Sounds like it's probably named after, I'm going to guess it's something with like a biblical name of Abraham, but we'll just figure out what it actually is.
No. So it was a guy named Abraham.
Okay.
Some rando.
He was a farmer. Yeah, Abraham Martin. He owns the field, and this is where the battle takes place. But why it's significant is that this is the end of New France. So it's a very small battle. There's only 10,000 troops involved, but they lay siege to Quebec City, and they manage to break through, and they take the city. And this is it. They are done. This is like the last bastion of French power in the New World, and it's gone.
I guess they wouldn't have had much defense left at that point if they were the last, and it was mostly agriculture.
Right. Well, I mean, just because of where they are, there's just better resources in the United States than there were in Canada. Like it's colder, it's more densely forested. You can't make the great big farms that you can in the US. It's just a little harder to eke out an existence in Quebec.
We do have really big farms.
Yeah, well, hey, if you have lots of farms, you have lots of food, and so you can have lots of people or lots of money, and it just compounds on itself.
Yeah.
So they capture Quebec City, and they've got some pretty cool people in charge of the fight. You've got, on the English side, you've got General James Wolfe, and then on the French side, you have Louis-Joseph Marquis de Montcalm.
Okay, both awesome names.
Yeah, exactly. And both of them die in the fight.
Oh!
No.
But the English are victorious. The French evacuate the city. Then a little later, they capture Montreal, and that's the end of New France. New France is done. And why the Plains of Abraham is significant is because today, Quebec remember that as like this is like the beginning of the end. This is when the English took us over. This is when. And what they also see is that France gave up on them. So there have been opportunities for Quebec to rejoin France, or that has come up, but they're not interested. France abandoned them. That's how they see it.
Oh, they don't see it as France lost. They see it as France gave up.
Well, yeah. Well, France is busy fighting Prussia. They don't care about Prussia. They just don't want to be ruled by the English.
I find that interesting. You kind of wonder, the perspective people have on how their nation was formed, is really, affected by whatever nation took it over. Out here, there's a lot of things in America where it's we, this is our land. It's like, oh, well, you also, did a lot of things to the Native Americans that weren't cool. But if they took the area from France, it's like, I guess the perception could be skewed by, now being under Great Britain, or maybe they really didn't like that the French kind of ditched them. Right.
And it's a little bit of both. So what ends up happening is that with England now in charge of North America, effectively, you've still got the Louisiana colony, but that's really, there's no one living there for the most part. Like people live in Louisiana, but it's a big empty swath of land where there's no one there. So eventually France is just like, well, we can't really keep this. We'll just sell it to the Americans.
Some say it's still a big empty swath of land.
And it's sad because, there are still French people living there, the continuation of that French culture. But for different reasons, Louisiana has been in consistent decline, and it's sort of like the last remnants of that historical event. But yeah, so Plains of Abraham, why that's significant is that Quebec, they still hold a grudge not only to France but to England as well, and for some of them, it's they hold the grudge to Canada at large. So on license plates from Quebec, they have a saying at the end, "Je me souviens," I remember, which means I remember the good old days when we were autonomous and French and free.
Was that like the Canadian Confederate flag?
A little bit, but like not even. That's like a disservice to Quebec. Like right now, Quebec, they're the cool people. It's Alberta, which is the Canada's answer to Texas. That are some of them are even flying Confederate flags. I don't even know what to do about that.
Sorry, that cracks me up. That cracks me up. I'm like right on the Mason-Dixon line, so I kind of expect to see some people have the Army battle flag of Virginia right near Appomattox. But why Canada?
I don't know.
Wow.
So yeah, there's talks about Alberta separating because they don't like that everyone is mean to them because they have oil, and Canada wants to be environmentally friendly, and
I'm just jealous.
Oh, that's what they say, and they feel like they pay too high taxes, even though they've got so much money. It's a thing.
Aye.
So yeah, that's the end of New France, pretty much. And eventually, the war just kind of peters out. Everyone loses interest. The ruler of Russia changes, and Russia's out. And eventually everyone, like I said, they just decide, all right, let's just pretend that none of this happened. We'll go back to the way it was, except for England, which managed to sign a much better deal, which is, okay, everything goes back to normal and we keep everything that we stole.
Yeah, I was going to say, so like, was there any kind of treaty that came out of this, or like some, declaration of the end of the war? Or did it just kind of stop?
There's a couple of treaties that are signed to end the war. And the treaty that England signs is that they get official control of North America, minus Louisiana.
Not bad.
So France is like, okay, we're out. We're not even going to try to rescue Quebec. We're done. And you can see why Quebec would be pretty upset about this. Of like, oh, thanks for nothing, guys. You could have just done something.
Yeah, well, especially like considering the better deal that England got.
Well, yeah, it goes well, and to England's credit, they do let the conquered Quebec people keep their language, keep their religion. So they're allowed to be French speakers. They're allowed to be Catholic. They don't try to control them too much, but they are technically subjects of England.
That works.
Yeah. So, I mean, it all worked out in the end, I guess.
Technically, they're still subjects.
Well, yeah, technically, yes. Does not go well for the First Nations people. Predictably, I think you could summarize all of history with "does not go well for the First Nations people." Now that there's only England who has a monopoly in North America, they can't rely on the English fighting the French all the time. Now the English can just focus their efforts on wiping out the First Nations people.
Oh no.
So yeah, it doesn't go well. And there's a couple of groups that they end up allied with, especially once the American Revolution happens and there are once again two sides to the conflict. But for the most part, having a monopoly in North America is not good for the First Nations people because Europeans are not the kindest to people who have different skin colors. If you've read a history book, you might...
You just pick any history book, you'll find it. Yeah.
That's another outcome. Something else that happens is that if we go back to our friend George, he's actually in the one of the inciting events of the French and Indian War. You might know him by his full name, George Washington.
What? No. Can't be him.
He gains experience in the French and Indian War so that once the colonies decide to revolt against England, he's battle hardened. Like he's been fighting since like he was 20, and he's got all these years of experience. And so once it comes time to fight the British, now he's halfway competent because he's just
done it.
Yeah, he's done it before. Like he he was living on a farm previously. How else would you be able to fight this war unless you how else would you be able to beat one of the most powerful empires in the world, the winners of the 7-Year War, if you yourself were not trained by them?
He was trained to combat in the Americas, which was very different from battling in Europe, which showed a lot in the Revolutionary War, where the soldiers coming over on boats really didn't know how to survive.
Well, exactly. Like, not only does he have experience, but he's got home field advantage of he's fighting in America. So once there's a war in America, he's ready.
Yeah, like, who do we look to? Oh yeah, George, he knows how to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And so another problem or another effect of this war is that it's very expensive fighting the First World War or the 0th World War. So everyone is broke. No one has any money anymore. And so obviously what you do when you're a government with no money is you raise taxes.
Yes.
And we kind of know how this goes. So England decides to tax the tea.
They sure
did. And then they lost America. Oopsies.
They're not collecting taxes from us anymore.
France decides to tax the peasants, and then the royalty loses their heads. Oopsies. And then you know what? Spain also decides to tax its citizens because, well, yeah. So as America rises up against England, Spain and France see this as an opportunity to take England down a few pegs because they're still a little salty about losing the 7 Years' War. So they help. That's very expensive. So it's even more taxes that they have to extract from their people. Spain starts trying to extract taxes from its colonies. That doesn't go so well. And all of a sudden you get Simón Bolívar, who destroys the entire colonial empire of Spain, liberates all of South America and Central America. And that's really the end of the Spanish Empire. And then we go back to James. So after he's done mapping out Newfoundland, planning this sneak attack on Quebec, everyone is so impressed with the job he did that he gets given a special mission. The year is 1769, so it is 6 years after the end of the 7 Years' War. And they're doing some science. So England, I'm not sure when this happened. Might do a full episode on this later. But England, the reason why we use Greenwich Mean Time as the place where we start our time zones is because England was the first country to go out and map the sky. So they mapped everywhere around the world. If you are at these coordinates, this is what the sky will look like. And they made very detailed observations so that anywhere you went in the world, you could consult this book and figure out where you are using a sextant, using their observations.
Interesting.
I don't know if this was part of the project or tangentially related, but they wanted to observe the transit of Venus. So they sent him out into the Pacific Ocean. This is where he has to be to see this astronomical event. And what are they hoping to find out? I think it's the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Somehow, like, Venus is going to go in front of the sun, and they're going to have people all around the world at the same time that this happens observing it, and they're going to record their findings, and somehow this will tell them how far away the Earth is from the sun.
That's kind of awesome. I guess we'll see tell us if it worked or not, but I do love like old astronomy and how much work people put into trying to just understand the world by just watching stars.
So James, it doesn't go well for him. Something like he does the observation, but he doesn't quite get the results he's looking for, or like it's not good. Like it doesn't work out. Like he tries to do it, but you know, he keeps going. He keeps sailing through the Pacific, because he hears legend of a mysterious continent called Terra Australis, and he finds some other islands, and eventually he makes his way to Australia in 1770. This is, of course, James Cook.
Ah, good old James Cook.
And I can just imagine the Star Wars Imperial March playing as the HMS Endeavour shows up at the shores of Botany Bay, because now England is set to ruin another series of cultures.
It's like, hey, has anyone taken claim to this yet? Nope.
And, we just play the whole America story all over again.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, 7 Years' War, surprise, surprise, involves James Cook and George Washington, who are actually only 4 years apart.
You don't ever, I guess in America, you don't often think about them in the same sentence, but really, like, all of this was going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I guess as well, because they're both English citizens, or at least they were, they're on the same side, which is weird to think about. When you think of George Washington, you don't think of like a proud English citizen for sure.
Not anymore.
Revolutionary general, but they didn't interact much, did they? Or like at all, James Cook and George Washington?
No, I don't think so. Like it seems that George Washington was just part of the Virginia militia, and then James Cook was, I guess, a cartographer. I don't know if that was like his official. That might be an insult to either cartographers or to whatever he was, but like he worked for the Navy making maps, and that's why they hired him for this expedition, because of his experience in the lead up to the siege of Quebec.
Right.
So it's all connected.
All connected to England taking advantage of European war to just like mess around with the rest of the world.
Yep.
Amazing.
And so, I mean, the fallout of that is you have America, you have every country in the New World. It's kind of the beginning of the end of the European empires, with World War II being the final nail of the coffin.
So them trying to stake land all amongst themselves just went up tearing them all apart bit by bit over time.
Right. Well, if they had just been able to agree, all right, this is your land, this is my land, let's be friends, it would have been fine. I'm sure we still would be under English law if that were the case. But nope. Europe famously cannot get along with other Europeans.
Now, I like the ripple effects of that. I mean, France obviously exhausts their funding, which has the dual effect of them, losing the monarchy and also then having to side with America during the Revolutionary War.
And like it's all connected. So this kind of like sets the lines for all future conflicts of everyone who's enemies. Kind of, they stay enemies for a while until things kind of settle down, until we reach World War I. But yeah, that's my story of the 7 Years' War.
I like it. I learned some things.
Yeah, I never knew how much was involved in that, especially because I think we mostly hear about the French-Indian War over here, but like just all the extra conflict involved. It really does like affect everything. Like, I think the most interesting thing is how like something could become a worldwide war at this point when there's so like the technology is still the same as like the Revolutionary War, because people point to like World War I and they're like, well, at this point, even like to that day, the world was a whole lot flatter. Like people were able to fly now. People were able to like lots of new technologies being created. The communications were getting better, and like it was more possible to be fighting worldwide. But at this point, you still were sending messages and letters and boats.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how that would have worked, because I mean, to get a message from England to India, it must have taken a little bit of time. So you couldn't have done a coordinated attack. All right, we're just waiting for the first opportunity to attack the French. Go on my signal. So I'm not sure exactly what that looked like. But it definitely does look like England saw an opportunity and took it, and it paid off handsomely.
Except for in America.
Well,
it paid off handsomely for England at the time.
Yeah, if they if they had given them representation for their taxation, maybe it would have been fine. But
if only.
Yeah. But that's the story of how England first took over the world.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, I'm not big into colonialism, but it's so interesting to see how this stuff plays out.
Right. I don't know if you can see my anti-colonial bias, but
nobody likes it.
Yeah, since then it just doesn't hold up to our modern values.
No.
So your original thesis there was that this deserves to be called World War Zero. You think you sold that?
I think so. It's a war that's happening all around the world. There really wasn't an opportunity for anything prior to that. And you got the big players. You got England, you got France, you got Russia, you got America, I guess, in it, sort of. That's what makes a world war. You got pieces of Germany. It's all the same players. They just have a little different names.
Oh yeah, slightly different naming structure there. Yeah, all right.
Just hit shuffle the names every now and then to start the wars over.
Remix.
Cool. Well, that's the 7 Years' War. So I think that about wraps up this episode. So I'm David.
Aiden.
And JJ.
Hey, thanks for listening. If you want to stay up to date on the show, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also have a Patreon if you want to contribute to the show. That just allows us to make it a higher quality. We'd appreciate you leaving us a review wherever you're listening to this. That will help other people listen to the show, and it's going to let us grow our audience. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.